In today's video, I am surprising my friend George, CoralFish12G here on YouTube, with a custom oil painting. I'm also going to be giving you guys some tips on how to paint your own portraits.
Why did I know that something like this was going to happen? Coming to her house.
I've been a marine artist for over 20 years. While I have branched out into other subject matter, my first love will always be marine life. About 2.5 years ago, I got back into reef keeping. I bought a little 13.5 gallon nano tank and a couple of clownfish. After being out of the hobby for about 15 years, I was hooked again. I met Sean and George through Aquashella around the same time. And I had the opportunity to paint a lot of really fun Aquashella themed art. I had told them I wanted to eventually get a larger tank for my clowns. I was thinking maybe a 30 or 40 gallon, nothing too big.
And we're picking up the tank for Lisa. How big is the tank, Sean?
It's an 80 gallon.
As you can see here, Sean is getting inside of it. It's super strong, handmade glass here in Dallas, Texas. Sean, how you feeling in there?
I feel it's spacious. It's spacious. This is a very big tank.
Sean knew the space I had available and filled every possible free inch with my dream tank. My clownfish are a little appalled that I had ever considered a smaller home for them. You know I'm going to have to bleep that out. We can't swear on this channel. Knowing that George would be coming all the way down to Dallas for this, Sean and I decided to surprise him with an oil portrait. Sean wanted an old-time looking painting with George looking super serious. The photograph supplies was, well, it wasn't ideal for a reference photo. Couldn't see any detail at all. It was bad. He also wanted me to paint him in a suit. So I combined these two photos and used this as an opportunity to try a new technique where I apply more skin detail and texture to a photo where I couldn't otherwise see that detail. Now for the big reveal to find out if George approves.
Why did I know that something like this was going to happen? Coming to her house, knowing as much art stuff that she does. This is insane.
That's a legit portrait, my friend.
Oh my God. Lisa. Okay, how long did this take you?
I worked on it on and off over several months. Actually, my fans over on Patreon already know about that because this has been one of their lessons from a few months back. They followed along. I'm really glad you warned him though that you were in on this. Otherwise, if he walked in and saw that, it was like he's gonna think I'm a stalker. What a weird thing to happen in your office. For the space around this painting, I know for certain I'm going to follow the theme that I did on this lion with the coral mixed in with another animal. I know one that I'll be doing first will be a chickadee with coral blending into his feathers. I'm so excited to start this. I still haven't decided the sizes that I'm going to go with, but I know that there will be multiple paintings in this area. So make sure to subscribe if you have not already, if you want to keep up to date with all of these surreal marine themed paintings coming up. Also, if you are not aware, I have prints of a lot of the paintings that I shared with you in this video. I will put a link to those in the video description. If you are looking for a way slowed down version of this tutorial where you can follow along brushstroke by brushstroke, make sure to check out Patreon. For as little as $4 a month, you get access to all of my longer tutorials. I have over 200 available for you instantly when you sign up in multiple mediums and a new one every single week. If you're not sure if Patreon would be a fit for you, you can check out my Patreon video library over at my website. The link will be in the video description along with a free 2-hour colored pencil demonstration. For this portrait, I decided to go with a Frederick's Blue Label Ultra Smooth Canvas because it is super, super smooth. Just for transparency, I am sponsored by Frederick's. They did provide me with the canvas that I'm using in today's video, but they were already the only canvas I used, so nothing new there. But anyway, I wanted to go with something that was very smooth so that as I'm blending the skin tones, as I'm trying to get fine detail on hair, all of that is very easy to do. If I were working on a canvas that had too much tooth, that's going to make my job very difficult, and the end result is not going to be, it's not going to be cute. So that is what I'm using here. And I'm starting by painting in acrylics. You can do your underpainting in acrylics, which will save you a lot of time, and acrylics can be a little bit easier for painting fine details like the wrinkles around the eyes and such than oils, because it is a thinner paint. You can then paint your oils on top of that as a glaze, which is what I'm going to do on this one. And I'm starting in black and white, so all I have to worry about are my values. Are my lights light enough? My darks dark enough? That will make all the difference in the world in my work looking realistic. So you want to have a very accurate line drawing, but you also want to make sure your values are correct. It doesn't matter how good your line drawing is if you don't get your values right. If your lights aren't light enough, your darks aren't dark enough, your work will look flat no matter how perfect that line drawing was. So make sure you pay attention to your lights and darks in that. Also, while we are creative, we don't want to get too creative about where we put the lights and darks, because where we're putting those highlights and those shadows, that determines the underlying bone and muscular structure. So if you start randomly putting highlights where the face shouldn't have them, you can start making the person look somewhat deformed. So be aware of that too. You can hype up the contrast, and that's what I like to do. I definitely did that quite a bit here on your lights and darks, but make sure they're in the right location. So going through here, again, just building up those values back and forth. Now, the thing that I wanted to do on this painting was to increase the skin texture, make it look not like a plastic Barbie. That's something that happens a lot when you're painting. Everything's over blended, too smooth, and especially in this case where my reference photo, I couldn't see any detail. So it's very easy in that case just to make everything too smooth. That's fine if you're painting babies and kids, but when you're painting adults, it ends up looking a bit odd. So in this case, what I'm going to do for my underpainting is overdo, like really overdo the wrinkles in his skin and the skin texture. Now, what I did is I just went and found a high resolution, high definition photo of skin texture and applied that here. You do have to pay attention to which direction you move these lines, and we haven't started those yet, but once we do, they need to go the right direction, but I can apply a different, somebody else's skin tone or skin texture to another subject as long as I follow the direction that that movement should go. So here, let's block in the highlights and shadows on his hair. And then we're going to do the same thing for his suit. We'll come back to his face in a moment. And for the suit, doing this in acrylics was so much easier than doing it in oils, just because when I paint little details, I like to rest my hand on the canvas. And if that canvas was wet, like it would have been with oils, it just becomes a little bit more of a challenge. And so you end up having to use a maul stick, or you could even use a broom handle to rest against the canvas, so you can put your hand against that to stabilize it. But here, because it's acrylics, I don't even have to worry about that. My hand can rest right on the canvas. And that's one additional bonus to doing an acrylic underpainting. When you've got a lot of tiny detail like this, where you know you want to rest your hand on the canvas because you're a lazy artist like I am and you don't want to go find your maul stick, this just works out nicely. Adding general shadows here under the collar. Nothing here needs to be absolutely exact to the reference photo. In this case, close is close enough, but I want to pay attention to the general lights and darks. This is the same thing as the face. I don't want to just randomly throw highlights where they wouldn't make sense. So here's that skin texture that I was telling you about. What I'm doing is taking a small brush. This is a pretty small Taklon bristled filbert. I don't find the brand really matters. I'm not super picky on the brushes that I use. Picky on the canvases, picky on the paint, not so much with the brushes. As long as it's a Taklon bristled filbert, I'm pretty happy. So I'm going through with that and I'm letting my brush strokes show. And I want them to show more than what I want the end result to be. So this should really stand out. His skin will be very, very modeled in a very unnatural way on purpose. He'll almost kind of look like he has freckles here. The goal there, or the reason that I'm doing that, is that when I start layering with oils and start glazing over, while I will be using translucent paints, it will tone this down a lot. So if I want this texture to show at all, I need to make sure that I'm overdoing it, that my contrast is too much, so that when it's toned down, it'll be just right. And that's what I'm doing here. You can really see that roughness to the skin. Here, I'm coming through with a darker gray. So I had started with that really light gray. Now I'm going back through with the darker gray. Same thing with the circles around his eyes, the wrinkles. I am overdoing that quite a bit so that when I tone it down, it'll still show up. Now my next stage is to go ahead and start in oils. So I'm going to do the background first, and that is just going to be in gray, so black and white. Went ahead and painted that, let that dry so that I could then rest my hand on the canvas without smudging anything. Now I use a product called Liquin. That is my mixing medium. It is a fast drying medium. So whatever layer I paint, it's going to dry overnight. It'll be dry to the touch. So it makes my life much, much easier than some of the slower drying mediums. And you can use that with any of your oil paints. So whatever your favorite oil paint is, that will make it a fast drying paint. It's still slow enough that you can blend and get all your nice details, but it's not going to stay wet for weeks like what I've done before when I used linseed oil, and I had tried a few different oils when I first started with oils. I did not like the dry time. So here I'm starting to lay in the color. Most of the colors that I'm using here are very translucent, and so that's going to allow that skin texture to show through here. And I'm not worried about this being the perfect skin tone. I'm just worried about getting my darks dark enough, lights light enough. My values are what matters right here. Another thing to notice, big tip, when you are painting portraits, the white of the eye is not going to be white. It's actually fairly close in value to whatever your skin tone is. The brightest white will be the highlights, but you don't want to make the white of the eye really, really white. You will often see that in a photograph where somebody's eye, the white is really white. It's overexposed. In nature, or in natural tones, I should say, you're not going to see the white of the eye that bright most of the time. So we want to tone that way down. Now, as we get to this super creepy stage, it's kind of funny because I had stopped here and I got a few other pieces of art out of the way. And so I had this stage right about here. I called this Zombie George. Zombie George lived in my studio just like this for weeks, if not longer. And it just kind of became a joke whenever anyone came in, like, wow, that is really creepy. So this was Zombie George staring at me and judging me for not hurrying up and finishing the painting. Zombie George judges us all for not spending enough time at the easel. So now we're going to go ahead and continue here. We let that dry overnight, and now I'm going to go ahead and come back to it. And here I'm really now hyping up the color saturation. So a common question that people have when they're painting portraits is, what color do I use for skin? Well, that's kind of a weird, like that. There's no way to answer that question. One, it depends on the person's skin tone. Everyone's going to be slightly different, but more so, it depends on the lighting that person is under. If they're standing under a light that has a purple tint to it or a red tint, like anything will affect their skin tones, the reflection of the clothing they're wearing or the room that they're in. There's no definite, these are the colors you're always going to use for skin. It varies. I mean, in this case, I used a decent amount of purples, blues, and magentas, more so than I might normally, just because of the tone of skin I was going for here. But the bigger thing is your values matter more. It's not that big of a deal. I could have painted him completely in purple and he would have just looked like he was standing under a purple light, but he still would have looked realistic. So the color that you're using isn't as big of a deal as your values. Are your darks dark enough? Your lights light enough? That is what's going to make all the difference in the world in your work. You want to get over the idea of focusing on the color. If you're having a hard time making your work look realistic, whether it be a portrait or an animal, anything, if you're having a hard time, there are two elements that are going to be the biggest deal there. One is going to be an accurate line drawing. Is your line drawing accurate? The second and most common issue people have are their values. They have a hard time getting those darks dark enough and those lights light enough. If you have the perfect skin tone, the perfect color, congratulations, you painted a cartoon because it's one color. You've got multiple shades and values in there. Here for his jacket, I'm just glazing blue right over this. It's thinned down with a lot of liquid, and that's all it is. Very easy. I'm letting those previous layers in acrylic do all the work for me. The oil painting stages are much faster. Well, let's back that up. They're slower in that you've got to wait for them to dry. You know, that dry time does take up more time. But besides that, the actual hours spent painting is spent more on the acrylic side than the oil side. Once that underpainting is done, when I start glazing color, this goes a lot faster. I mean, minus having to wait for it to dry overnight every time I need that layer to dry. Now, as you're painting, you're gonna have some ugly layers. You're gonna have some layers that look absolutely terrible. And you may come across times where things were going good or going very, very well for you. You thought, wow, this is looking great. And then you did another layer and thought, oh my gosh, I wish I would have left it alone. It was better before. Don't worry about when that happens. It's inevitable. You're going to have some layers that make you feel like you went a few steps back. That's a part of the process. Keep layering until it looks good. There is no, there's the concept. People think you can overwork something, but you really can't. The idea of overworking things with oil paint, the only way you're going to overwork it is if you're not letting it dry in between layers where you should. So you start to create this muddy mess where the colors are mushing together. That happens, just stop and let it dry. But if you hit a point where you think, I overworked it, I spent too long on this, I should have left it alone before, if you kept working on it, it was because you knew it wasn't quite done yet. So there was no reason to stop working on it, even if it got worse. That was a part of the process of making it better. So when you get those layers and have those times where you think, oh, I messed that up, I should have stopped before. No, that just means you're not done yet. A bad layer does not mean you've ruined anything. It just means you're not finished. Keep layering until it looks good. Here, adding some highlights, and I'm really just worrying about my values and then final little details as I work my way through. I decided I wanted some more highlights on the hair, so what I'm doing is using my titanium white, which is an opaque white, throwing those highlights on there. I will let them dry, and when they dry, I can come back and glaze another tint of color over them. It's easier than trying to mix the perfect color in the first place, because then you're worrying about getting your values, your highlights light enough at the same time as mixing the magical perfect color. So by doing the highlight with white, I'm gonna let that dry, and then I can choose my color and glaze it. If I were to glaze it and realize, wow, that color was terrible, that was the wrong choice. All I have to do then is wipe it off because I let the previous layer dry. So you can fix mistakes really easily with oil paint. Notice too on his eyebrows. Eyebrows are not going to be one solid color. You've got some variation of the lights and the darks, and then some individual hairs that will stand out apart from others. Don't Sharpie marker the eyebrows. It's not a cute look. I know some girls think it's cute. I'm telling you it's not cute. We don't want that in our portraits. Coming through here with some more shadows. And again, all of this, it's all a matter of glazing. A lot of translucent layers, lots of liquid. Some highlights there, and that's what you'll hear me say going back and forth. Highlights, shadows, highlight, shadow. I'm just gonna go back and forth until I like how it looks. Highlighting the wrinkles a little bit more, making some of them stand out where I kind of toned them down more than what I wanted. Now look at the skin texture. This is what I was talking about before, where it was too harsh earlier. When I did the acrylics, it looked way too harsh, very, very scary looking. But once you build up and once you get to this stage where you've got multiple layers of color over it, it tones that detail down so much. That's why in those earlier stages, you need a lot of contrast, because you're gonna lose a lot of that in your later layers. So here is our finished painting of George. Now this painting is really interesting because I did so many layers. Depending on the lighting that this is under, it will look like his skin tone is very warm or very cool just by changing the room and the way the light is. Because all of those translucent layers, the light reflects, that's not a word, words are hard. The translucent layers, light refracts through each of those layers, and it creates a lot of depth that while you can't really capture it on video or in photograph, in person there is a lot of depth that you would not see if it was just one layer in the beginning, kind of that paint by number style, put the right color in the right place. The very last thing I needed to do on this painting was to varnish it. The varnish that I'm using is Gamvar by Gamblin. The great thing about this is that you do not need to wait like you do with most varnishes. Most varnishes will tell you to wait 6 months after a painting is dry before you can varnish it. That's a problem when you need to send something to somebody, or in this case, giving it to somebody to take home with them. So with this product, you're able to paint it or varnish it as soon as the painting is dry to the touch. Now, I typically give it another week or so just to be safe, but most of my layers, because they are so thin, everything's dry within a day. So I am pretty safe to go ahead and paint that right away, and it gives it a really nice, beautiful gloss, finishes off the painting so nicely. Now we'll have a link to the products that I'm using listed in the video description. Here is a little bit of an update on the office. I have moved Glitch, my little red-eyed tree frog with a neurological disorder. She is now in here in the office with me, so I get to enjoy her company all day. She's not actually the greatest company. She sleeps during the day, but either way, we're hanging out. She's in here. And just a quick little public service announcement. This tank that she's in is way too small for a red-eyed tree frog. So don't see that thinking, oh, I've got room for that, I'm gonna run out and buy one. It's too small. The only reason she's in this one is because of her neurological issues. She falls a lot, and so it's not safe for her to be in a much larger vivarium at this point. I'm hoping if she does eventually improve a little bit that I can upgrade her to a larger one. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. You do not want to put a frog in a tank this small. Hers is a special case. But yes, she's now in the office with me. I put in 2 chairs in between the coral quarantine tank and the big reef tank, and I spend a stupid amount of time sitting there now watching everybody. I love this space. This is definitely my favorite room in the entire house now. I really can't thank George and Sean enough for making this happen. It's surreal. Like, I just love this room. I love everything. I love everything. So happy. I think I need to make them some more paintings. Have you subscribed yet? If not, I have a handy button right there. It's round, has an orange arrow going towards it. If you click on that, that'll help you to keep up to date with all of my new art videos every single week. Also, click on the bell notification icon because YouTube is terrible about notifying people when new videos go up. I've also got an email newsletter I send out once a week with updates on whatever videos went up and what that week's live streams are going to be.